Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm Deziel and today I'm showing you how to do a finishing for the neck of a shirt. Now you remember this little shirt that was part of my pattern for kids, the boys group, and I guess you also remember that little blue shirt that I showed you, and I told you that I was going to show you how to do this bias finishing for the neck. That is pretty easy to do and very helpful to know when you don't have any facing or you don't want to do any facing on your shirt. So for this example that I'm not showing the whole shirt, I just want to show you how to do the neckline. I'm still going to give you the step from the beginning. Now when your shirt is cut, you're going to start by sewing your collar piece together. So top and under collar, face to face. You're going to do the top seam, and I guess you notice here I did not put fusible, but usually collar needs fusible for the top and the bottom collar. So once your seam is done, you're going to open and do your understitch on the under collar. Then on both sides you're going to fold the top seam and close both sides of the collar. When both are done, here I decide to grade down the seam allowance, so I only cut the corner of the seam allowance, just like this. Then we'll be ready to turn the corners. So your thumb is inside, push the seam allowance all in the same direction, then turn and push the corner out. Once both corners are out, you could press your collar. Then you should see that the understitch made sure that your seam stays on the under collar and that now both neckline are even. Now since we're at the pressing board, we're going to also press the little placket of the shirt. So one by one, you're going to do both sides, folding first at the first notch at the bottom and bring the first one at the neck over the second one. So just to help me out, I usually do just a little bit on top, a little bit at the bottom, and then you press the rest of the placket. Then you do the same thing one more time. So at the second notch at the bottom, and at the neck you bring both notch over the last one. Now the next thing I'm going to do is at the sewing machine, I'm going to close the open side of the collar by doing a stay stitch from one end to the other at 5 millimeters or half your seam allowance. Then for the next step, I'm going to assemble my shoulder together. So take your back and place it with the right side going up, just like that. Then you're going to overlap your front, so good side with good side. Place your shoulders together and you're going to do your seam on both sides. Then you could overlock. Once your shoulders are sewn, we're going to press the seam allowance towards the front. Then you're going to take a piece of bias. This one is 3.5 centimeter wide. I cut it myself, but if you have pre-cut bias, it's also good. The only thing is it has to be an open bias, so no fold. Then you're going to take a measurement long enough to cover the whole neckline, so from the fold to the fold, and keep a little extra just in case. Now the next thing we're going to do, we're going to take the bias, fold it in the middle, so wrong side with wrong side, and we're going to do a little stay stitch at about 5 millimeters from the unfinished edge, and you do that little stay stitch all the way to the other side. Make sure you don't pull while you do your little seam, and you don't need or you should not press the bias either. So just at the sewing machine. The next thing we're going to do is to assemble the collar to the shirt. So this is the good side of my shirt, and I'm going to place over the under collar. So just the way it has to be when it's finished. Under collar over the good side of the fabric, and you're going to sew from the center front notch. Make sure you open the placket. So from the center front, you have matching notch for the shoulder and for the center back, all the way to center front on the other side. And we sew with the usual seam allowance. Now my collar is attached to my bodice, and on the collar side, you should have two seam lines. The first one when we close the collar and the regular seam allowance. Before putting the bias, I suggest that you trim your seam allowance, the 3 layers, cutting right after the smallest seam, so the 5mm line. So I'll be cutting right next to that seam. Then at this point, you're going to take your bias and place it right next to the first fold on the shirt, just like that, putting the edge all at the same level. Then you're going to sew right over the seam that you did on the bias, all the way to the other side, finishing also at the first fold. When your seam is done, you're going to flip the bias, and you could do an understitch, so 1mm on the bias side. Now you could see my bias is attached to the garment, and hopefully you could also see my little understitch that pushed the bias towards the garment. Now I'm going to ask you to cut the little excess in your bias, so right at the fold line or a little even before. Now before to do the last bias seam that will attach it to the bodice, I want you to close both corners at the center front. So you're going to keep the first fold done and fold in the opposite direction the second one. So you bring it towards the collar. Again, keep your notches one over the other, and you're going to sew using your normal seam allowance. And I show you right now what you should get is a nice clean corner. Now you could see that both of my corners are sewn, and we can now turn the corner. We will be ready to do the last seam, so to stitch down the fold side of the bias onto the bodice. And to do it, you have to make sure that you really open your seam, so you might have to pull it a little bit on both sides. The seam is going to be at 1mm from the fold, and I usually start it pretty much at the center front, but you could decide to start your seam right at the fold, at the center front, or just at the end of the facing. Now you could see the result, and I hope you noticed that after I finish my bias top stitch, I did also stitch down the placket. So I did it only on one side, but you have to do it on both sides. Then you could just continue the assembling of your shirt by putting your sleeves, doing your side seam, and your hem. That's it for today. I hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching, and I see you next time.